Welcome to the Good Growing Podcast. I am Chris Enroth, horticulture educator with the University of Illinois Extension, coming at you from Macomb, Illinois, and we have got a great show for you today. It is a summertime Q&A, and I say because it's just so darn hot out there right now. Oh my goodness, and you know I'm not doing this by myself. I'm sweating it out, as always, every single week with horticulture educator Ken Johnson in Jacksonville. Hey, Ken.
Hello, Chris. It is definitely steamy. Fortunately, today there's a bit of a breeze, which helps slightly, but it's still hot.
Yes, and by bit of a breeze, like it's like a straight line 30 mile per hour wind in some instances. Yeah, it's very windy. We just out at the ball fields, and those poor kids out there were just getting dust and sand and grit blown in their face all morning long. So they need to go brush their teeth when they get home.
They won't have to exfoliate when they get home.
Exactly. No, they won't. It's just that outer layer of skin will come right off in the shower. So, oh, goodness. Yeah, I seem to be finding myself, it seems weird considering it's mid-June, but finding myself with the hose in my hand, sometimes 2, maybe 3 times a day now. We did this last year too, but we had kind of an unprecedented spring drought. We've had a lot of, well, not a lot, but we've had adequate rainfall this spring, which was very nice. But it seems like, at least where I'm at in Macomb, the Macomb Dome, as it's known as here, has been doing its job. A lot of the storms as they come through tend to break up or split right around Macomb. And I know you have the Jacksonville force field as well.
Yes, it's been holding strong, at least in my yard. We're starting to crack in areas. So we could definitely use some rain. I have to start doing my rain dance here. So I don't have to keep watering constantly.
Exactly, yes. So the water bill is going to be getting high a little bit earlier than normal, which is going to be June. Normally, we're out there watering a lot in July and then August, but June's typically got some moisture still on the ground, but that is not the case today. So,
yeah, I'm looking at the forecast. It's not, as of Tuesday, it's not looking very promising. Pretty hit and miss when it comes to rain.
As of Tuesday, June 18th, we are looking at 90-degree highs and no rain to speak of for the next 10 days here in Macomb. So, yahoo! We'll keep an eye on that weather, though. So give me a morning when I don't have to wake up and water. So that'll be nice. So in addition to a lot of the questions that we have about when that rain will arrive, there are other questions that are arriving into our extension offices. And so these are going to be sort of early summer themed questions here now that we will be sharing with you actual questions from real people that we have been working with to try to solve or answer these questions. So, Ken, I think I'm going to kick this off with asking this question to you, since I don't have this issue in my neck of the woods, but I know you do. So this first question is asking about the branches at the end of their trees, and they want to know that some of the branches on their trees are snapping off, they've dried out, or they're just hanging up there and dangling in the canopy. What is causing this, and how do I fix it?
So this is the cicada egg-laying damage, or the flagging. So again, if you remember all the cicada talk, cicadas, they're laying their eggs in branches, usually about the width of a pencil, maybe a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller, but pencil range. They're inserting their ovipositor, their egg-laying device. They will kind of saw into the branches and deposit their eggs, and they'll work their way down those branches. This will weaken the branch. So if we get wind, any kind of wind, sometimes those branches will snap and the tips of those branches will start to die, and we get this flagging. So that's all those dead branches we're seeing in the tree canopies. And here in Jacksonville, when you were here, you saw this. There's a couple of trees that have an extensive amount of flagging, and there's others that have just a few spots here and there in the canopy. For the most part, there's not really anything you can do about it. The damage is already done. You could remove those if you really wanted to. It's not going to hurt anything to leave them there. They'll eventually fall on their own. The eggs of the cicadas are in these branches. They'll start hatching about 6 to 10 weeks after they've been laid. So we've still got some time before those eggs start hatching. The eggs will hatch, the nymphs will drop to the ground. They'll start feeding on roots. Probably more than likely, they'll start off with turf grass and then work their way down onto the roots of the trees or the shrubs that they were laid on. Just kind of depends on what roots are around. So those cicadas, when they're feeding on those trees, it's probably not going to cause really any significant damage to really slow them down. All those eggs that got laid in there were caused by cicadas that have been in the ground for 13 or 17 years feeding on those plants, and your plants have been doing just fine. So there's not really any need to remove those flag branches or those damaged branches. You can, but it's not going to really affect the long-term health of the tree by having those nymphs feeding on those plants. Again, they're in the ground for 13 or 17 years. It takes them a really long time to grow. So they're not removing tremendous amount of nutrients from those plants. So there's really not a whole lot you can do. If they're falling to the ground, you can rake them up and dispose of them. It's going to look kind of cluttered and messy if you have a lot of those branches dropping, but they will fall on their own and have this self-pruning. And a lot of times we'll get a large flush of growth or a lot of flowering in some trees next year because of this natural pruning.
Get out the rake and start cleaning up all the limbs coming down. And I as I was in Jacksonville driving around with you the other day, Ken, I noticed all of the branch tips falling off in the wind and everything. And it's actually kind of neat to see, these are just the tips of the branches. It's not big limbs falling out, and they just sort of glide down like a helicopter would, just sort of float on down to the ground. So it's kind of neat. If I was down there, I would go down, find a tree with really bad flagging, and I would just make a game out of trying to catch them as they fall to the ground. It's how my mind works.
Today would probably be a good day to do that.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. We're a very windy day. Breezy. Yeah. All right. Well, also, so there are people, though, who maybe tried to protect smaller plants, trees or shrubs or whatnot. Are they out of the woods? Can we take off the netting over our other trees and shrubs?
So right now, June 18th, a lot of this is going to depend on where you're at here in Jacksonville. Sadly, the singing has stopped. I have not seen any live cicadas here in Jacksonville for a few days. So we've removed all the netting on our trees and stuff. So we're past the point of egg laying. I've heard a little bit, maybe a few in Springfield left, but we're getting towards the end. You're probably safe to pull them off there. If you still have a lot of singing, you probably want to leave your netting on just to protect those trees. But once that's singing, and you'll notice all of a sudden it gets quieter and quieter, and then all of a sudden there's nothing. Once that singing really starts declining or you stop hearing it, you can then remove that netting. Or if you netted something like a rose or something like that, things like Japanese beetles, just leave that netting on. And if you have issues with Japanese beetles, you can keep them off there then too. So
exactly. Yeah, that way you got to figure out reuses for all this netting that we had purchased now. So, yeah, Japanese beetle deterrent. It's one way to go.
You netting on depending on how big the netting is, fruit trees, keep your birds or squirrels or animals off. So yeah, there's multiple ways we can potentially reuse this if you really want to.
It's true. It is blueberry season. My blueberries in my yard are ripening up. We got our first bowl that we picked the other day, so we can keep the birds off by throwing some nets over that, and prevents the birds from getting them before we do.
All right. So our next question here has to do with tomatoes. So what's wrong with my tomatoes?
I think we both that's the question I've been getting.
Not necessarily tomatoes, but anything. What's wrong with fill in the blank?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think for the most part, a lot of the tomato issues that I've been seeing are pretty common early season tomato issues. A lot of times folks are going to point directly towards a disease, like what is infecting or what is wrong with my tomatoes. Maybe the leaves are all curled up or they're all distorted, and or they're discolored or stunted in their growth. They don't have as much vigor in that regard. Now, I will say, in our neck of the woods, again, this is all very depends on, we haven't gotten rain in Macomb. Maybe like 10 miles down the road, you have gotten rain where you're at. So it's been very spotty in terms of rainfall, but it's been very dry and hot. And so one of the responses that tomatoes will use when it comes to that hot, dry conditions is called physiological leaf roll. And that's where the leaves actually will curl and roll in on themselves. Very common, especially early in the season with young tomatoes. They have not as established root systems to draw up water and to kind of withstand some of those stresses of the hot weather from the summer. That's very possible. That is just a natural response to those tomato leaves just rolling up. Another very common issue, unfortunately, is herbicide drift that I've also been seeing on our tomatoes. That's kind of a tough one to identify because there's other, like the leaf roll, which is a natural response, looks very similar to herbicide drift. But its tomatoes are often planted in backyard gardens, and oftentimes backyard lawns are also being sprayed for dandelions, and those chemicals can volatilize and drift, especially when it's hot out. Volatilization of those chemicals are more common when we have temperatures over 85 degrees. And does that mean when you spray your lawn in the morning when it's 70 and then the high that afternoon gets to 90, does that mean you're safe? Nope. That's because those chemicals are still on that leaf and they can still vaporize when they get to that 85-degree threshold. So, when people are wanting to spray their lawns with something in that regard, I say, the label will say often 85 degrees is, that threshold for spraying, but, that should be the high for the day should be under 85 for that day and probably the next couple days that you put that product down. Now, when it comes to diseases, a very common thing, and one that came in just earlier today after talking with this client, they sent some pictures. It looks a lot like a disease known as early blight. Early blight, well, named because it starts early in the season. So, hey, that's a very clever pathologist. Way to go. It is a disease that typically affects tomato leaves from the bottom moving up. It could also be septoria leaf spot, though, another disease, very similar pattern, slightly different in appearance. But again, a lot of times symptoms can manifest very closely in appearance to each other when it comes to tomatoes. So it can be very difficult to tell. That's why, I always tell people, when you send me a picture of a plant disease, I can guess, but the only way to know for certain is to send off a sample to our U of I plant clinic. That's the only way to confirm a diagnosis. Early blight or septoria, these diseases, they can come in on transplants that maybe you've purchased from the garden center. Also, if you've grown those same plants in that same spot in the garden for years and years, that disease can overwinter on plant debris in the soil or on the ground. And so it can build up to more and more higher levels if you don't clean that out and rotate your garden crops. That's why we always say rotate your garden crops. So if you grow tomatoes in one spot, you really want to rotate the entire nightshade family out of there. Nightshade includes tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, potatoes. That's a lot of things that we grow. So maybe throw in cucumbers or lettuces or something else in that spot the following year. And then if you got the space, you do a 3-year rotation, do like corn, sweet corn or something like that can help fill in that space or that block of area. Beans, something that you can break up those disease cycles in a 3-year cycle, usually. As Ken, do you usually recommend 3-year crop rotation cycles?
Yeah, in an ideal world. I think we both recognize that it's easier said than done in homemade landscapes a lot. And with those foliar diseases, mulching can help with that. If they're overwintering in the soil, mulch, that'll prevent that rain splash. That rain splash could have those spores in there splashed onto your leaves. So if you mulch, you provide a barrier. It's not 100%, but it will slow that down quite a bit. Mm-hmm.
And I guess, and the other reason also why it is important maybe to confirm that diagnosis is because a lot of times the foliar diseases are fungal in nature, but there are some bacterial diseases as well. And so if you would spray a fungicide, it might not be as effective against certain bacterial infections. But there are some sprays that will work for a fungus and bacteria. And so you just have to go to the garden center, read those labels. If you are going to use a fungicide on something, you're going to want to prune off those affected leaves. The fungicide is not going to cure the disease. It will just prevent the spread usually to other parts of the plant, or at least slow it down. But with those fungicides, read those labels, make sure it's listed for use in a vegetable garden on crops that you are going to eat. Follow those post-harvest intervals, and just make sure you're thoroughly reading that label, because again, we're spraying a pesticide on something that you are going to be eating.
Yeah, those fungicides or bactericides, they don't cure, they protect. So once it's there, you're not getting rid of it. You just prevent it or reduce the chance of it spreading. Protect that new unaffected foliage.
Travis Cleveland famously said on this podcast that fungicides are like sunscreen. They can protect from a sunburn, but they cannot cure the sunburn.
Need aloe for that.
That's right. That's right. That's why I grow so much aloe. This next question, I have gotten several phone calls about this. I got so many phone calls, I got confused over who I had talked to at this point. So this next question is about weeds and asparagus patch. What can I do about weeds and my asparagus? Ken, take it away.
So at this point in the year, we have fewer options because the asparagus up, it's leafing out, it's ferning. So at this point in the year, we're looking at hand pulling, maybe some slight shallow tillage or mulching. At least I'm not aware of any herbicides that you'd be able to spray that's not going to affect your asparagus. So your hand pull, shallow tillage, making sure you're not hitting those spears, those ferns that have come up, because they need to produce that energy. Kind of like spring bulbs. They need those leaves out. They need to produce that energy, store that, so they can then produce asparagus for us the following year. Or mulching. Now, this was early in the year before they emerge. You can do an herbicide. If you don't have any asparagus above ground, you can spray an herbicide. After your last harvest, after you harvest everything, and again, you go in with an herbicide. As long as you don't have any of that asparagus above ground that's going to come into contact with that. So do the best you can right now, and then next spring, you can go that herbicide route if things really get out of control.
And I don't know how they got my number, but I had 2 commercial asparagus growers get in touch with me, and that world is way different than backyard asparagus patches. If you see a commercial asparagus field, I mean, those are mostly, there's no vegetation there. They spray and they cultivate it so that there's nothing on there except for asparagus. So it's kind of a bare soil situation in many cases. So that's a little bit of a different scenario, but it's tough controlling asparagus after, like, because you need it to photosynthesize. It's got to get the energy so you can harvest it next year. And so my big recommendation, at least to the non-commercial folks, was mulch. You can mow. You know, if your asparagus, is still pretty vigorous, still looks pretty healthy, maybe you can mow it all down and possibly spot spray herbicide. Again, got to read that label. Make sure that can be applied in that situation. But for the most part, it is going to be, hand cultivation, hand weeding, hand mulching.
Yeah, and don't use salt.
No.
So asparagus can tolerate higher salt levels, but you run the risk of really messing up your soil using salt. So you see that maybe not as much as it used to. You still see that thrown out there sometimes as a recommendation for salt or for weed management and asparagus, and don't do it. Save yourself the headache down the line, potentially.
The old timers I was talking to about this, I mentioned the salt thing because I thought, they're going to ask, can I put salt on there? And they already said, wow, absolutely not. We've already dealt with this. We salted our asparagus patch and it killed it off. And so, over time. So they knew.
All right. Our next question here is a lawn question. So my lawn is thin. What kind of fertilizer should I put down right now?
Nothing. Next question. I'll elaborate slightly. Most folks here in Illinois are going to be growing a cool season lawn, which means the hot, dry weather is going to be stressing that lawn and is going to be pushing it into its summer dormancy. A lot of our lawns, at least here in Macomb, Ken, are you seeing lawns going dormant, where they're losing that bright green spring color?
Yeah, we're starting to go dormant.
Mm-hmm. So if you would put fertilizer down right now, you are not feeding your turf grass. You are feeding every other plant that is currently actively growing, which for a lawn would be considered the weeds. So if you have a thin lawn right now, there's not too much that we can do in a cool season lawn as we're entering the heat of the summer. Throwing down grass seed is just going to possibly stimulate germination at a time of year when those cool season turf seedlings will be met with hot, dry weather, and they'll just burn up and die in the midsummer. I have put down sod in heat like this. You can do it, but you got to really stay on top of the water. It's a lot of work, but it can be done. The sod does kind of act as a mulch layer over the soil, which insulates it a little bit better than just seeding onto bare dirt. And so it can retain some soil. I will say that. So you can actually hold a little bit extra moisture underneath that sod layer if you want to go that route. But it's really tough to sod a cool season lawn in the middle of the summer. I've done it a couple times. Just got to keep an eye on the water, make sure it doesn't dry out and burn up.
Don't want to do it again.
I would not do it again. No. And also I guess the extra thing to say is that if your lawn is irrigated, it has a dedicated in-ground irrigation system that kicks on once or a couple times a week, you could fertilize right now because that lawn is green and actively growing. That is the only situation where you could put down a fertilizer in June on a cool season lawn, as if it has a dedicated irrigation system that is keeping it green and growing all summer long. Well, Ken, time to leave the lawn and head to the barn. Another common question that I see too is about carpenter bees. So in this instance, carpenter bees are nesting in the wood of my pole barn. Oh, that's kind of scary. What should we do about that?
You could substitute pole barn with deck, garage, siding, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep, pergola. Yeah.
Yep. So carpenter bees are going to excavate their nests in wood, usually softwoods like pine, things like that. They tend to prefer over or harder woods. So they'll dig that hole in there. They'll turn a right angle and they'll kind of go with the grain, building their nests. One, nest in there probably not going to do a lot of damage, but they will reuse these and they can get larger and they will expand them. So you do run the risk of that compromising the integrity of that wood if they're left to go. We're talking years and years here. So with this, once they're in there, you're going to be looking at using probably more than likely an insecticide. Dust the entrance hole in there, spray something in there. So when that bee is coming in and out, or the bees are coming in and out, they're picking that up. And in the case of the dust, they'll groom themselves. They'll eat that, and then eventually that'll kill them. You don't want to plug that hole up right away, because if they're still actively using it, they'll either remove that plug or they'll just excavate a new hole to get out. So you need to kill them before you plug up the hole. So kill them, wait several weeks, then plug up the hole. And in the future, painting the wood will help prevent painting, varnishing, something like that will help discourage them from using those pieces of wood. They don't like those painted surfaces, so they'll try to go find something else. You can try offering alternative nesting sites. So if you've got a dead tree that's not posing a risk to people or property, we'll add that caveat, or leave a stump behind that they could utilize. You could get some non-pressure treated wood and put it up, but offer them some sort of alternative nesting site to the more desirable areas that you want to keep them out of.
I love carpenter bees. They're my favorite of the bees, them and the bumblebees. But I love the male carpenter bees the best because they act aggressive and they can't do anything to you. I take my finger and I just push on them. I'm like, go away, get out of here.
Just make sure it's a male you're doing that too.
That's true. I think you have an article about carpenter bees too, Ken. We can link below in the description for if people want to read more about them.
Yes. All right. Our last question here is about everybody's favorite arachnid. Arachnids, right? Yeah. Where can I get tested? Where can I get ticks tested to see if they are carrying a disease?
There's two things out in the world that I kill with extreme prejudice: mosquitoes and ticks. They have see no mercy from me. So as someone who's had Lyme disease before, I am very vigilant about ticks, and I think I recently wrote an article about this where it is important to when you are bitten by a tick to get the tick identified. What is the tick that bit you? That way, it gives you, once you know the species of tick, because there are many species of ticks out there. When you know the species, you know the potential for what the diseases are out there. And I actually linked a couple labs, I think, where you could get the ticks tested. But Ken, we were talking before the show, and that's not a recommendation from the CDC. So I might need to revise that article and remove those links, or maybe at least check into those links, make sure that they're reputable labs.
Yeah, so this is one I actually didn't know until I got the question. Was it a week or two ago? So a lot of people are, they're concerned you get bit by a tick. There are several diseases that they can carry. Maybe people contacting us about where can I get these ticks tested. And actually, the CDC does not recommend testing ticks. And I'll just read from their website, and we can link to this too. So people who have removed a tick sometimes wonder if they should have it tested for evidence of infection. Although some commercial groups offer testing, in general, this is not recommended. So again, like you mentioned in your article, there are labs that will do this. But CDC does not recommend this because laboratories that conduct tick testing are not required to have high standards of quality control used by clinical diagnostic laboratories. Results of tick testing should not be used for treatment decisions. Positive results showing that ticks contain a disease-causing organism do not necessarily mean that you have been infected. So they may not have been attached long enough to actually transmit the pathogen to you. Negative results can lead to a false assurance. You may have been unknowingly bitten by a different tick that was infected. So, you test it, it comes back negative. You just ignore that headache and those muscle aches you're getting, which another tick could have transmitted something to you. If you have been infected, you will probably develop symptoms before results of the tick test are available. If you do become ill, you should not wait for tick testing results before beginning appropriate treatment. And then again, they recommend identifying the ticks so you know what diseases you should potentially be on the lookout for. So, if you are bitten by a tick, obviously we want to remove that. Make sure you're grasping the head as close to your body as possible and pull that straight out. Don't twist. Don't burn them off. Don't smother them. All of those other things. And then if you are bitten, if you develop a rash or a fever within several weeks, this is not necessarily like the next couple of days. Can be down the line a little bit. See your doctor. Tell them about the tick bite, when it occurred, where you most likely got it. Ideally, if you do remove a tick that's attached, try to save that. I know I've heard of people that have a notebook. Remove the tick, tape it to there, put the date where they were. They just got a notebook of ticks that they pulled off themselves. So again, if you have rash, fever, anything like that, muscle aches, and you've been bitten by a tick, contact a doctor about that.
Yeah. So yes, don't necessarily rely on the tick testing that you might get back. It could needlessly expose you to some pretty hard medicine because when I had it, they give you the strongest antibiotics that human beings have developed to try to knock it out. So, and if you don't have, if you're not sick with a tick-borne disease, those antibiotics could make you still sick with other things. So, because it wipes everything out in your gut and your body. So, yes, make sure that you are working with a physician, your doctor, when it comes to responding to tick bites and any symptoms that might develop afterwards.
Yeah, I don't know, like in a clinical setting, if hospitals or health departments would be capable of testing for that, but obviously you need to consult with the doctor if they've got the capabilities. They've probably got the certifications and stuff. But this is more, at least my understanding for me, this is more kind of the commercial. I'm just going to send this off and have it tested.
Mm-hmm. I think so. Yeah, I think there's some commercial labs out there, especially on the East Coast, where ticks are definitely more prevalent, especially in the Northeast, where a lot of folks are having to deal with ticks up in Maine, Vermont, Connecticut, areas like that. I think some of the labs I linked to, one of them was the university lab. Might have been Rutgers. So hopefully they're reputable. I would imagine, but Rutgers, we love you. You're great. But yes, I know that when I was sick, the lab results are actually being sent up to the Mayo Clinic up in Rochester, Minnesota. So our local health department was not able to do any testing or anything like that. But those were my human tests, not tests for the tick. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know our local health department does not test for ticks. They don't send them out. They don't do anything.
Yeah, I don't think Morgan County does either. But
yeah,
as always, if in doubt, talk to a doctor, a medical doctor.
That's right. We are not doctors, though I do play one on TV. All right. Well, that was a lot of great information about early summer gardening questions. Even though I feel like these questions normally start popping up later in the summer, or at least I feel like it's already mid-July, but it's not. It's mid-June. So yeah, that was a lot of great information there. So we will leave a lot of links below to different articles and things like that for you in the show description. Well, the Good Growing Podcast is a production of University of Illinois Extension, edited this week by me, Chris Enroth. A special thank you, Ken. Thanks for hanging out with me today, getting some of the questions together that we've been answering, and just seeing how we handle things between Morgan County and McDonough County.
Yes, thank you. It's nice getting out of the heat for a little bit. So
yeah, now back to it.
Head back up.
Exactly.
And we're going to kind of do this next week. Do a garden bite, I think.
Yeah, we shall do kind of this again next week. It's a garden bite time. So while Ken and I are out watering plants, you can still be enjoying some excellent gardening, landscape, horticultural advice. Are we advice givers? I don't know if I'd call myself an advice givers.
Start up an advice column here.
Oh man, yes, dear Chris. Here's what I would do. So anyway, I'll cut all that out. Well, the listeners, thank you for doing what you do best, and that is listening, or if you're watching us on YouTube, watching. And as always, keep on growing.